Welcome to Aircrew Interview. I'm Mike, and this is the first of our two-part series of the RAF at Red Flag. In this episode, we chat with Tony Dixon as he describes what it was like to fly in the air-to-air role as a nav in the Tornado F3 and F4 Phantom. So if you like what we do here, head over to patreon.com/Aircrew Interview, where you can help us out for as little as $1 per month. You can also donate by going to aircrewinterview.tv/donate. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Custom Flight Helmets, that provide custom solutions for your unique flight helmet. And you can check them out at cfhelmets.com. Thank you. Okay, Tony, can you first tell us what Excercise Red Flag is all about?
Okay, Red Flag is it used to be just an American, started in the mid-1970s, and then starting in the 80s they started inviting other countries to come and participate. The RAF, I think, were one of the first ones to come, and since then they have US-only flags, and then they have multinational ones. And it is basically to train people to fight with lots of different aeroplanes and different types at the same time.
So what was the first year you attended and what aircraft was this on?
Right, the first one was an FGR-2 when I was at Wattisham, and it was Red Flag 91, but it was in 89. For some dumb reason. The first flag of the year was always in November, but it was called the year after. And it was with 74 Squadron, although we flew the FGR-2 out there because it was a joint effort from Wattisham with 56. So we took out 56 aeroplanes and 19 and 92 aeroplanes, because after the 2 weeks we were there, 19 and 92 took over, and then they brought the aeroplanes back.
So what preparations would you do before going over?
You try and do 2 or 4 V many over Wales or over Scotland, having organised it with what was then the back end of the 80s, a lot of aeroplanes. I mean, you had GR1s, you had Bentwaters stuff, you had Upper Ayford stuff, you had Lakeney stuff, F111s, Harriers, Jaguars, so you could get a lot of opposition to do it. And it was just tactics on flying in a 4-ship against other aeroplanes. Normally, if you do it on your own, you don't have more than 4, so it's 2v2. But then you could do 4-ship operations and even 6 or 8-ship operations with twin caps, provided you had enough aeroplanes to play against.
Can you talk us through your first transit?
Yeah, we went out from Wattisham across to Goose Bay, tanked by the Victors that were going to be in flag with us. We got to Goose Bay, I think it was like 8 or 10 aeroplanes we took, and 2 went broke. So there was me and the squadron boss, Wing Commander Graham Clark, and then the senior flight commander, Di Whittingham, who's now in charge of the CAA, and a guy called Stan Ralph. And we were stuck in Goose Bay for the day while they mended the aeroplanes. Now, Stan and I were both ex-Canberras, so we actually were very good at route flying and planning, because we found out that there'd been no, what they call a lame duck plan. So there was no planning as to how we were going to get to Vegas without tanker. So we basically got a map out, got a hand like that, which was about 1,000 miles on the map, and went like that, like that. Second stop was going to be at Offutt in Nebraska, which is where our Herc was with all our ground crew on, just in case an aeroplane really went broke and they had to come and get us. And so we went halfway in this place called Griffiths, and I think it's in New England, ex-B-52 base, KC-135 base. And we did all the flight planning, went across to there. There's a couple of guys jumped out who were ex-Navy carrier guys. Oh, I'm Phantom. I haven't done a Phantom for years. So they did all the clean, they did all the canopies, they had a great time. Quick hour and a half on the ground, and then flew across the Central Plains to Offutt. That was phenomenal. The bit of Central America to the east of the Rockies, just before you get to Denver, is just, as far as the eye can see from 30,000 feet, fields, circular fields, because that's the way they do the irrigation, but that way, that way, that way, that way. Hundreds of miles of square fields, perfectly flat land. And then in front of you, you have a line of hills, which are the Rockies where Denver is. Phenomenal. Dropped into offer, quick turnaround again, got the offer of staying the night there, and we went, no, we'll press on to Vegas, because it wasn't that far, only about 400 or 500 miles from then. And we dropped into Vegas in about 6 o'clock at night to be met by the other ground crew, and so all the aeroplanes were there, basically, and it was good.
So what was the role of the F4 and Red Flag?
Okay, we did both red air and blue air. Red air are the bad guys, blue air are the good guys. So blue air is the bombers, the mud movers, the photographic aeroplanes. But there was an element of air defence support with them. So we did a week of red and a week of blue. Red Flag is the area to the north of Area 51. Red start on the western side, blue start on the eastern side, and then all the bombing ranges are on the western side. So the GR1s, Jaguars and everything else go through into the bombing ranges, and the fighters then come back to the east and come back down. Normally you tank, so you get airborne out of Vegas, go north if you're blue air, tank, and then head west. Otherwise, if you're red air, you go west, round the south of Area 51, tank, and then go in.
So, could you talk us through a briefing? Was it different from the UK?
It was a mass briefing. If you're red air, there was only the 8 aeroplanes, so 8 crews. Plus, you chatted with an AWACS representative and the tanker guys as to how to take on all these masses of aeroplanes. There were going to be 8V30, probably something like that. Well, you had each squadron of bombers had sort of 6, so there'd be A-10s, German GR1s when we first went out. There were some Singaporean F-16s. There was the American F-15 A's, I think they were then, of the based lot, who were normally red air, but they were being the fighter defence guys. And Hercs occasionally. You would have maybe in the night flags we did eventually F-117s. So it was a complete mix of stuff. And so they had a lot bigger. When you did the blue air bit, that was quite convoluted. And we had a segment in it saying, right, all the blue air guys were talking about, we're going to go in this, we'll drop it on here, we'll do this. We're going, what's happening? We don't understand what you're talking about here. What are you going to do? We'll be above you, we'll defend you. Okay, guys, that's good.
So how big was the range, and was there any restrictions?
There's no supersonic restrictions. Technically, there was a 250 feet initially height restriction, although Buccaneers were cleared to 100. There were some aeroplanes. You used your national minimum limits. It's, to give you an idea, it's open desert, rocky, with lines of hills with flat bits in between. The hills were really north-south and you went east-west. So you didn't want to go over them, you tried to find gaps in them around. Effectively, it's 150 miles north of Las Vegas. Area 51 is to the south side, and that's a complete no-no to go anywhere. Close to it, you get sent home, interrogated, the whole works. And it's about 150 miles east-west, and about 100 miles north-south, with a little gap in the middle where Area 51 is that you can't go, so you can go around it. And there are very few people there. Very few people. There are a couple of farms. There's one place right in the middle called the Farms, which has irrigation. So you see basically 4 green circular fields, because relevance everything to areas. Coyote East, Caliente West, the Farms. So, you're saying you're in a fight at the Farms. So if people are free, they can come and help you or whatever. So that gives you a rough idea of what's going on. Once we got to F3s, there's a little more electronics in it, so we didn't have to do that much talking.
So can you tell us about some DSCT trips you did in the F4?
Oh, everything really. The F4, jack of all trades. It can do bombing, it can do recce, it can do fighters, it can do all of them reasonably well. It's not an air combat aeroplane. It can't beat an F-16 and G. F-16 is coupled 9G, F-4's 4. So if you get in a fight, you're stuck. You had to alter your tactics depending on the aeroplane you were against. Jaguars, for instance, couldn't turn. Harriers, if you were up high, they do this viffing bit where they all stop and then turn around, which is, you have to be careful, because if they can turn around quickly enough and you've flown through, they can perhaps get a sidewinder at you as you're going away. Jaguars invariably go quite quick. We did some DACT down in Decimumano with Canadian starfighters. They came through the fight at 1.6 as a 4-ship and disappeared, and then 3 minutes later came back through the fight at 1.6 as a 4-ship, and then went home because they'd run out of fuel. So it wasn't exactly combat. Yeah. You could play with Hawks in the UK. That's difficult because they can outturn you, but you can out-missile them. So the idea is to get yourself in a position where you've got a better missile shot than they have. And that's true for all your adversaries. But you see, most aeroplanes now, even Jaguars then had sidewinders. Harriers could fit sidewinders on them. Buccaneers didn't. A-10s didn't in those days. But you didn't do, they didn't come up above 1,000 feet. They stay low all the time. So DACT technically is above 5,000 feet. Mm-hmm. Yeah, below that is low-level combat manoeuvring.
So how did the Americans view the FGR-2?
Well, they had the Phantom, so most of the guys, even the Eagle drivers, were probably ex-Phantoms, so they knew exactly what we could do and the capabilities of the aeroplane. We could go slightly faster at different aspects because we had the Spey engines as opposed to their J79s, but they knew that, so we were better down low with the Spey, whereas the J79 is better higher. But in Red Flag, the combats could take place down on the dirt or up at 20, 30,000 feet, depending on which element of the package that you were taking on.
You have to tank on every sortie?
We tried to, but obviously one or two Victors, depending on whether the Victor on the first flags we went on, or the VC-10s on the second flags we went on, had the capability to tank all our airplanes. So maybe you'd launch 8, 4 would tank, and the other 4 wouldn't, because physically on time constraints.
Mm-hmm. Would you carry live weapons?
No, you wouldn't. You carry a Sidewinder acquisition round, which is exactly the same head as a Sidewinder, about that long, but then it'd be a hollow tube behind it, so that in the cockpit you got the sound of the acquisition going. So it's exactly the same front end, but without any explosives, and that would be on one of the rails. You would also carry what's called an ACMI pod, Air Combat Manoeuvring Instrumentation, which looks like an acquisition round, but that fits on one of the other stations. That transmits to stations on the ground where you are, speed, height, and everything else, and then they play that back in the caravans back at Nellis, and then they play it back after a sortie.
So talking about the debriefs, they're obviously quite famous. Could you talk us through?
When you land, with the F4 here, we used to have to take film of the radar intercepts because there was no way of replaying it. You quickly went into the film debrief room, went through it with a QY for any shots that you took, and they would say yes, no, or whatever. If they were slightly out of configuration, they'd say no. So you'd then go into the main debrief, which is in a huge auditorium with the shots that you've taken and the time you took it, which is the critical bit. You were in a huge theatre with a great big screen, and they would play the whole sortie. So the screen would be effectively 100 miles across, and all the aeroplanes should have tracked on them. Sometimes some of the aeroplanes didn't track properly, or if they went behind a hill, they'd disappear for 10 seconds or so. And then you just play along. And every time a shot came up, somebody would go, stop, at minute such and such, 20 seconds, green 1 took a shot on the southerly most of those tornadoes. Good shot. They went, okay, let's have a look at that. And you could actually, you press the button and this little missile come off and track, and hit the aeroplane that you were aiming at, because it actually might not be the one you thought it was. And then they put a little coffin around that aeroplane, so anything it did in the future wasn't counted. Just kept on flying, of course. And conversely, if you were shot by one of the F-15s, you had a coffin, so any future shots that you took didn't happen. That's something to flag. There's an ACMI in Detchi, and there was an ACMI in the North Sea, and what you'd do there, purely for training value, you'd be able to be dead for 2 minutes. You'd fly out of the fight and come back in and regenerate effectively. But on flag, that just got too difficult. So you'd be dead for the rest of the sortie. You'd still do all your training and everything else. And you'd do the whole lot. Sometimes, I remember one when we were on F3s, an eagle came in and said, right, I took a shot. There were 3 Italian tornadoes tracking. And he says, yeah, I came round, took a shot, dead line astern on the singleton on the left-hand side of the 3. Oh, okay. And immediately the Italian went, sorry, I'm number 4. I wasn't tracking. I was 3 miles behind that one. And as you turn around, I took a sidewinder shot on it. And the whole auditorium just erupted. It was brilliant. And the American Eagle driver went, Nick, because he'd never seen him. Because if you're hooking in to a bunch of muds and you see 3, there's always the card 4. Always. And he just didn't look.
Oh, so this was an Italian GR, not an F3?
No, Italian GR1. Yeah.
So would they track you from takeoff to landing?
Yes.
Or was it just a fight?
Yeah. Oh, they had the potential to. They didn't invariably, because I think it would be difficult as soon as you took off, because the tracking masts were actually in the range. Mm-hmm. So it's when you got close to the range you appeared. Mm-hmm. But of course you had AWACS support as well, so they were telling you where everything was, where the groups were massing and where the fighters were. Once we got to the F3, we could then reproduce that on our screens, but I mean, in this thing we have a little radar box and that's it. And we had a map on your knee, because if somebody said Caliente West, you go, well, that's there, we're here, so it's over there a bit. So it was more difficult with the F4, certainly.
So would you say the F4 performed well at Red Flag?
Absolutely. We had good results. I believe the RAF have still got the best training crews in the world, and we can adapt to different scenarios. Other air forces are more regimented. And the way they fight is very regimented. Once you know that, that's easy. Obviously in those days it was against the Russians. We knew that they were extremely regimented and couldn't do anything on their own, and were told to do things by their ground control.
I'm really surprised about that, actually. I thought they'd have a bit more freedom.
Apparently not. You read some of the books and they were, maybe in a 4-ship there was 1 senior pilot and 3 youngsters, and the youngsters had to follow him no matter what. He was probably very good, but the others weren't. Yeah. And I suspect come the war, the others wouldn't have lasted as long as he did.
Yeah. So how long did you spend over there in your first time, and did you enjoy it?
Yeah, well, you enjoy staying in Vegas for 2 weeks. Yeah. 2 weeks. You go over when we're on the F4s, we left on a Wednesday, night stopped in Goose Bay, and we should have got there Thursday. As it was, we got there Friday because we lost the day. The mass briefing before the flag is on the Sunday, which everybody has to be at. And then you fly Monday to Friday, have Saturday off, and then you fly Sunday to Friday on the second week, and then you finish. You come home and the other squadrons come out. In our case with F4s, we had 74 and 56 the first 2 weeks, and then 19 and 92 came out for the second 2 weeks. I think with some of the F3 ones now, flags have gone to 6 weeks, so you can get 3 lots of squadrons.
Can't be bad Vegas and flying for 2 weeks.
We had a big sandstorm once. I mean, curiously, we seem to have the winter, and the weather can be bad. They can have high winds. Up in the desert, you can have 40, 50 knot winds. Basically, you can't fly over there. Even Vegas might be nice, but up in the desert, it's a lot different.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking about a 5,000-6,000 feet base where the ground is, and a lot of things can be different up there. Mm-hmm.
You then flew on 2 exercises on the Tornado. Could you tell us what squadrons this was?
Yeah, I was with 5 Squadron, and we went out in 92 with 29. And I think we were the middle, I seem to remember, we must have been the middle of the 6th, because we air transported out and air transported back. So I didn't have the joy of flying an aeroplane across again, which is a shame, because parts of America are tremendous. And we picked up in the middle of a flag. The problem was the 2 flags that I did with the F3 were night flags, or day-night flags. So as opposed to 2 day waves, you did an afternoon wave and a night wave. The night waves, I wouldn't say they were useless, but they didn't give us much practical training, because the Americans were, you've got 40, 50 aeroplanes in the airspace, so the Americans were very, very strict on height blocks. So if there was 4 of you, when you had the 3s to 7s, one was at 13, one was at 14, one was at 15, one was at 16. And you could only move up and down, and you couldn't move out of yours unless you saw the other ones. You certainly couldn't go down to 7,000 feet, because you went, unless you positively cleared that block. Now, if you get illuminated by a missile, the first thing you do is brake and dive. Well, technically, you couldn't do that. And so your anti-missile manoeuvring was more difficult at night. And more people tended to get shot because they physically couldn't do what they did during the day at night time. And you couldn't do close combat, because once you got close-ish, you were in your height blocks, and you just see a set of lights, and wasn't much practical benefit out of it. The mud movers, GR1s, they could do night TFR, but you can do night TFR in the UK with us looking at you, for instance. So the practical benefit they got, I'm not sure was as good as day ones.
Yeah. So was the Tornado a lot more capable?
You had more ability to know what was going on. The radars were better. I mean, instead of looking down here, down between my knees, you had 2 TV tabs up here, one of which was the radar and one of which was the map. And you put positions on the map so you knew where bits and pieces were. Once we got Link 16 from AWACS, their picture was on the screen, so you could see basically everything that was going on. And so you had more situational awareness and more ability to see what was going on.
So did you operate the Tornado differently to the F4 when you went over?
No, the aeroplane does the same. It's a fighter. It's designed to shoot other people down. You did it slightly differently because you had more awareness of what was going on. You could manoeuvre probably the same. In fact, the 4.5, 5G was about a practical maximum for these. They're not pure fighters. They're not the F-15s, 16s, 18s who can pull 7, 8G quite happily. And so you had to temper your tactic in that way. The best way was run away. You come into a mix, you see a pair of F-16s there, you think, right, I'll go away, come back tomorrow. Because you can come back tomorrow.
Run away bravely.
Run away bravely, yeah. Because then you could use your weapon system. If you could get far enough away, turn around and fire a sky flash at them. That's better than trying to turn around behind them and fire a sidewinder.
So how did the F3 fare against the American types?
We out-tacticked them. As I said earlier on, we have the best tactics, or I believed at that stage we had the best tactics, and therefore we operated. They were trying to fire AMRAAMs all the time, which they fire at 20 odd miles, and then they turn around and the AMRAAM can then fly all by itself, going up to 30, 40,000 feet and then come down again. But they assume that you keep in a straight line. If you remember the famous Battle of Britain film, one of the biggest things for the new pilots, never fly in a straight line for more than 30 seconds in combat. It still applies. If somebody's firing a missile that goes to sleep in its transit, so you don't know it's coming, and then only comes back on again in the final phase, it'll come back on for 3 or 4 seconds. And if you're still in the little bit of airspace it thinks you are, you've got no problem. Oh no, you've got no chance. But if you've manoeuvred out the way and it doesn't see anything, it'll just keep on going.
Yeah. So So would you go up in 2 ships or 4 ships? What would you go up on?
6s with the Tornadoes. I think we went with 8s with the F3s. And it was either 6 or 8. You went up in as many as you took with as you could get on, that were serviceable for that day, depending on how many you took, effectively.
So would you work with AWACS every mission?
Yes, the AWACS would be there all the time. And when you were Blue Air, you either sat up on a cap, high level, and went out in front of the bombers, or sometimes we embedded in the bomber stream. I remember on one of the flags, we sat on a B1's wing, and in the pre-brief he says, "You can't do that." And we said, "Why not?" "You can't fly fast enough." "Yeah, I think we can." In fact, we easily did it, because what you did, you sit on his wing in what's called res cell, resolution cell, and a fighter coming the other way will only see one blip. You don't have your radar on, but you're getting information from AWACS, so you know what's going on. And when he gets to about 10 miles, the B1 will maneuver to avoid a possible missile. We will then just pull away, climb up, turn the radar on, and surprise this F-15 pilot with an AMRAAM coming, with a Skyflash coming at him. And that worked very, very well. It really did.
So did the heat affect like serviceability or the pilots and themselves?
No, once you got in the aeroplane, the first when we were in there with the F4s, it was 90 on the pan, early November. The F3 ones were February, and therefore the temperatures were the 80s, so it wasn't that bad really. It's a long runway at Nellis anyway, or a long pair of runways, and so it didn't affect you that much. And once you're up in the desert, the only problem was the fact that you were operating at ground level of 5,000–6,000 feet, and therefore, as you go higher, the air gets thinner and the performance gets less. But that's the same for everybody.
Mm-hmm. So, what would you say the biggest strength of the F3 was compared to all the other types?
I think once you got the Link 16, the ability to see on your screen what everything's going on. I mean, the Typhoon's got a similar sort of system. You don't need to use a radio then, because you can colour code or change the symbol, or the AWACS can, basically allocating you a particular target without telling you, radio wise. And so you can just operate with no comms jamming, for instance, which probably would have happened in any proper wartime with a sophisticated enemy, not with Kuwait or Iraq or anything like that, because there wasn't really a sophisticated opposition that could do that sort of thing. The problem with Nellis, it's got 2 runways, and you've got 40 aeroplanes you've got to get off in a particular time. All right, the fighters normally get off slightly earlier because they have to go to the west and it's a longer transit. Or you could argue that the bombers go slightly early because they go and pre-tank. So it was staggered a little bit. What you've got to remember is that Nellis is not just a red flag. There are a couple of squadrons of A-10s who do bombing ranges to the east. There's weapons schools. There's probably upwards of 120 aeroplanes on the pan, of which only 60 were involved in red flag. So the others are doing their normal daily stuff. So they have effectively 1 runway for takeoffs, 1 runway for landings. You can use both. If nothing's landing at the time you're going, you can get aircraft airborne quicker. But normally, I mean, they're slick. They do it every day. So the air traffic controllers are very slick. And if you've got a mass recovery, because you can't really dictate as your landing slots, because depending on how much the pilot's been using the throttle as to how much fuel you've got, what time you're coming back and everything else. So you could coming in for the break and you could be clear for, I think it was 1-8 the runway. Yeah, they could change you from 1-8 left to 1-8 right. So you brake the other way, or you brake you brake the same way, but then just ease the finals turn so that you went on the other runway, because nobody's using it. That means somebody else could come in behind you quicker. It's very slick, very slick.
So would you often go supersonic over the ranges?
You could do. I think some of the bombers used to run away from a fighter that's behind them. Probably going supersonic as you lose fuel. If you're running away from a fighter and a missile, yes, you could. Yeah. But otherwise you wouldn't. It's just a waste of fuel.
So what did the F3 fly with? Was it always fitted with the 2 tanks, or did you fly clean?
I'm trying to remember. I've got the pictures. I've got some are clean and some have the 2 tanks. Problem with the tanks, of course, is you can't do the turning. I think a lot of the times we went clean because we tanked, and then you could do it that way. If you didn't have the tanker, you had the tanks on, so that you could actually got the time.
So how long do you spend over there on both tours?
Well, say you had 2 weeks over there. You flew across Civière or RAF Air. I think we went out and back on a TriStar a couple of times for 2 weeks, then came back. But you did about a 4-week workup doing various bits and pieces before you went out. And obviously, when you were in the simulator, your simulators were 1v4, 1v whatever, and did it that way.
So which did you prefer, the F4 or the F3 at Red Flag?
I like the F4 because it was more fun to fly. The F3 was better because it operated better. But it's purely an opinion. It depends on whether you're doing with your heart or your mind. Your mind, the F3 is better. Your heart, the F4 was good.
So overall, did you enjoy your experience at Red Flag?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in the evenings, when we did the day flags, for instance, you used to fly afternoon. For instance, if you flew an afternoon slot, you did a morning slot the next day. So you get back to your room at 10 o'clock at night from the afternoon slot, and you were up again at 5 o'clock in the morning. Then you finish that one, and you get back after the debrief about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then you didn't have to go in until 10 o'clock the following morning. So you had that night off, effectively, and you lived close to the strip in apartments. The strip was the cheapest place for food, because you could pick food up at dirt prices. People did gamble, but it was a trick of finding the cheapest blackjack tables and the cheapest slots, effectively. But of course, if you go into a casino, there's no clock. Yeah. They don't have clocks, so you could be there all day. But you normally went out in groups, so you didn't let somebody off on his own to make any mistakes that you might. I don't think anybody got married while we were out there.
That's something anyway. Okay,
saw Elvis a couple of times though.
I'm sure a few as well.
Okay, the basic layout for Red Flag. If you've got look at the map, Las Vegas is to the south. All the area to the north is effectively desert. The square in the middle is Area 51. Absolute no, don't go there. The area ranges to the north, and there's 10 or 12 different range areas, and they're all used during Red Flag. The bits down to the south and west were where they did some underground nuclear testing back in the 50s. You can't go over there either. Red Air take off and go to the west and start off on the western side. Western side ranges have the air-to-ground ranges, so that's where you can drop all the bombs and everything else like that. And you also have a lot of simulated missile sites down that area, so the mud movers can attack a missile site and get the right missiles warnings. The blue air guys get airborne, go up this corridor to the east. If you have to tank, you'll do that off here, and then you'll start at a particular time. Blue will know what time you start, red won't. They'll know roughly within about 5 minutes. And you effectively go east to west, drop your bombs, and then come back west to east, fight your way out. If we tanked, we probably had enough time to wait for them and come back and help them fight their way out. We didn't normally go much further west than where north of Area 51 you didn't want to go over the bombing ranges anyway. So you fought your way in with them, loitered, and then came back out with them. Excuse me. You normally found that the F-15s probably didn't have that much fuel, so they were going to run home at the time. Technically, Red Air came home that way, and Blue Air came home that way, but if you found your way over here and you were desperately short of fuel, you basically came the easiest way, but not going through the box in the middle, because that was an absolute no-no. I remember there was one aeroplane, I can't remember if it was an F4 or an F3, up on the top of here is an airfield called Tonopah Test Range, and it's an airfield, and it was an F117 base, and they had to land there. They had a hydraulic problem, which meant they had to land within about 20 minutes. There was a lot of diplomatic problems when they landed there. Although they said they didn't see anything because everything's kept in hangars. But the grilling of why you did this, are you spies, are you this? Because the Americans, it must have been F4 days, so we're talking 1989 when the F117 was newish, and the Americans were a little bit twitched about it, to say the least. And you basically fought your way out, fought your way back. There was another airfield down to the south here called Indian Springs. I seem to remember AV-8s flew from there purely because it was closer and they didn't have the range to do anything else. But it's all desert. There are various ridges, north, south, which were places like, it says Caliente West. They got the Coyote Canyon, Coyote Delta, the farms, and they were all places that you knew about, so that if they said, okay, there's a fight going over the farms or the red area over the farms, you knew where they were. So if you either wanted to fight with them, you went to them, or if you didn't want to fight with them, you avoided them. And these are all north-south ridges. And that's the problem, you had to go east-west. So you had to find gaps where the ridge dropped down a bit, or certainly the mud movers did, and because they don't like to go over the top of a ridge, because if you're doing 400 or 500 knots and you go over a ridge at 90 degrees, you normally balloon over the top, or the tactical way is to, as you go up to a ridge, invert, pull, and go back the right way, because an aeroplane prefers to pull G rather than push G. So if you push, you will balloon over the top, and this is navigator speaking. Apart from that, it's there are very, very few people up there. You can go supersonic at low level if you wish, and some of the MUDs who were capable of it could do it and did it. Not much point for fighters. If you go supersonic, you tend to run out of fuel very, very quickly. Okay, we're talking about October 1989 now, 17th, with an FGR2 with the squadron boss Graham Clark. We flew from Wadisham to Goose Bay, TriStar AAR for that, 5 hours 40. The TriStar, I seem to remember, then continued on to Nellis because 2 aeroplanes went broke, ours being one of them, which was 480, which is interesting because the one here is 490, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Off the top of my head, yeah. It was mended overnight, and then we flew as a pair because another airplane then broke. Goose Bay to Griffiths, 2 hours 20. Griffiths to Offord, 2 hours 20. And then Offord to Nellis, 2 hours 15. We then had 3 or 4 days while the engineers got the aeroplane sorted out. First red flag sortie was an hour 20, which is basically a range for mil. You just flew over it to get used to all the places. And then the next, we missed a day. Then the next time, 3 days running, we did Victor AAR of a 2 hour, an hour 50 sortie, or then one untanked of an hour. And then that was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, miss a day, Sunday, Monday, and then we did 3 more the next week. All again, hour 45. I suspect that I've missed that out because I suspect we we tanked on that for the R45. And then we came home by Civier, and that was it for the F4s. Right, F3s, October 92. Okay, 5 Squadron, Tornado F3s, Red Flag 93-1. I flew with a guy called Mark Sheldon, who is a good friend of mine still, lives locally in Lincolnshire. He's now an EasyJet training captain. He was then just a lowly flight lieutenant, but then he became QFI, QY, Stanival guy. Good guy, nice guy. And we did Victor AR. We'd gone out there by TriStar, and we flew 3 times the first week and 3 times the second week. I remember it was very windy that week, and some of the flights we couldn't do because of wind on the range. The range is about 5,000 or 6,000 feet high, and if it gets windy, you're talking 45 knots on the ground, which makes it unsafe to eject over, so you just don't do it. And that was a day and night flag. If you see over here, we did a day, we did a night, day, night, day, night. DNCO radar at night, that's why it's only 45 minutes, because we came home. There's not much point in flying at night without a radar. You're not going to get any training value out of it. And then the final one I did was in 1999. Yeah, I didn't do that much on Red Flag. It was Red Flag 99-2. Flew with a guy called Al Seymour, who was a Squadron QWI weapons instructor, who is now a Typhoon pilot and has got promoted a couple of times. And we did a FAMIL sortie, VC-10 AAR 5 V many, VC-10 AR 6 V many, and then 2 more 6 V many, 6 V many. We were, again, it was a day-night flag. We did days the first week, we did nights the second week. Days we were blue air, and so we sat on the wing of a B1 down at low level. Nights, you're on your own. You don't get much out of it. It's difficult operating a 6-ship at night, and your tactics have to change accordingly.